To get the trigger out, there's a couple of jaguar decals covering there, which you have to just peel off carefully, get a screwdriver on there or something, and then you can see the two pins. And the two pins you just punch out. It's not really very tricky. Put a wooden spacer under there. Right. They don't require a huge amount of force, just make sure you get a well-fitting punch. Drift them out. You know, it's firm, but it's nothing excessive. Start nearly out. Let's do this one. I've got a piece of wood under here, just so there's no undue stress. Right, and I'll just drift the other pin out. The punch isn't quite long enough. That's the little labels, by the way, that cover up the holes. I'm going to glue that back when I've finished because the glue's a little bit weak now. So my punch isn't quite long enough. So I have a thin bolt that I use for making SSGs, which will be perfect to tap these out. One, very gentle at this stage, obviously, because there's not much holding it in. Right, so 2 roll pins, hammer out the way, the bolt out the way, we'll use that later. The trigger at this point, you know, give it a little wiggle, a little shove, should come out fairly easily. Yeah, there we go. So that's your trigger mechanism. What I've done with mine, just wrapped a bit of tape around it. I did that earlier because there's a little bit of slock inside. I'm probably going to enhance that slightly and once again use a bit of soft drinks can shim just to tighten that up. Just make sure everything stays together. It's not actually screwed together. There's various pins through here and I'm going to take this apart in a second and show you some of the other modifications I'm looking at. Right, so here's our trigger unit. Safety's been removed. Be careful not to lose that spring. The little ball for the safety rides on there. That is also part of the safety mechanism. As you pull the trigger, it rides up, which obviously it can't do if the safety's back. If the safety's forward for fire, it can ride up, so the gun fires. Trigger casing is in 2 halves, as you can see. This is the side you want to remove, and you keep the larger part of the enclosure facing down. All I'm going to do is partially drift the 3 pins down and out the way. And they don't require much force. I'm just literally, I can just push them. You only need to push them far enough to clear that casing. So what is that? Maybe 8mm. There's no point pushing them more than that because the internals will just start going for a walk. So I'm just going to push them all 8mm or so through like that. It's not going to fly apart. It's not one of those type of triggers, which is just as well for all of us. And then I'm carefully going to just lift that off. Yeah, bit of grease in there that I've put in there. You'll probably find the factory one is completely bone dry, which is not great. It's a fairly simple trigger. A couple of things I do need to show you. Firstly, this little set screw drilled and threaded through there is something I've added. It reduces the trigger engagement. It also brings the trigger blade further back, which was something I wanted to achieve. There's still good engagement, and if I cock the trigger, yeah, I don't know how clearly you can see that, but there is about 2mm of sear engagement there, which is a lot. Obviously, if I screw that in further, it reduces it. And the trigger mechanism, you can see how it works. That's the bar that actuates the safety, so you can see how that's moved. Interesting thing, this trigger, it's obviously single stage. There is a gap in there, and I'm thinking to convert that to single stage with a set screw through there, drill and tapped. I could introduce a first stage, and then when it came off the first stage onto the rear part of the trigger, that would effectively be the second stage. So it's a modification I'm probably going to do. I'm just going to think about it over the next few minutes, and I'll test that out as well. The other thing I think I'm going to do is just stone the sides of this piece at the rear to make it slightly narrow, just to make sure this rear section is not dragging on either side of the casing. It's going to be stabilised here, and simply because the distance of this section from the fulcrum, and equally the distance of it from the fulcrum of the trigger, if there is any drag on the sides of this piece on the casing, it's going to have quite a large effect on trigger pull. And just so you can see the trigger release, in case you're wondering, you can see what happens. It just directly lifts that sear up, and when it gets to a certain point, and it's still a long pull, there's still a lot of engagement, it releases. And this I don't know what it is, nylon Delrin bushing there, when the trigger release and the string flies out, that's a kind of a buffer for this to whack against, rather than whacking metal on metal, which makes sense. It's not badly made. I'd like to explore the option of making this two-stage, so let me do that now. I'm just going to back up my set screw, and you'll see that has quite a significant effect on travel. Screwdriver is really too big for this, but it'll do. So you can see how much the trigger blades move forward. Let's get that out of the way, and I need something very small, like, okay, a bit of welding wire, that may be too small. Right, okay, a lump of wood. I'm trying to test my kind of two-stage concept. So if I just jam a piece of wood roughly where I'd put my two-stage piece in there. Okay, I'm going to cock the trigger. So the first thing is to see how much engagement I've got. It looks like I've got a lot of sear engagement, which is the one thing I'm worried about. And what I want, the key thing to watch here, this is effectively the first stage. Imagine a set screw going through there. I've just wasted a piece of wood, obviously. You'll see this is taking all the load. At some point in time, as the trigger moves up, it'll switch to this taking the load on this sear, and that's when you feel the second stage. So let's just see how that goes. So all the way, that's still first stage, first stage, first stage, first stage, first stage, still first stage, still first. There, now I've got second stage, and it fires fairly shortly after. So I think that is a very worthwhile modification. So I'm going to do that. Once again, same caveat issued at the beginning of the video. Don't do this yourself. Show the video to a gunsmith or to a competent engineer, someone who knows how to work on this stuff. I've been working on these kind of things for 20 years, so I probably am qualified. So I am going to put that second stage in, and we'll come back to you when I've done that, and we'll see how it works. Right folks, done the modifications, so hopefully you can see that okay. I have simply drilled and tapped M3 by 0.5 to create a second stage. I've just guessed at the position. I've literally just put the screw in there. We'll test that in a minute. What I've also done is backed out the screw, the travel screw I made, just so you can see what I've done. Same thing. It's just a diagonal hole threaded with an M3 screw. There's the safety bar that I mentioned, and obviously that's effectively the sear spring. I would probably leave that alone. What I've also done with this piece, as I mentioned, I've just ground a fraction, just really touched it on the grindstone, but you know, making sure that's the grindstone. I've touched it like that, just to take a little bit off the tail, not off all of this section here, because you need that to stay stable, just to make sure the tail's not dragging on the sides of the casing. I've just kissed that off, fine grindstone, just taking the corners off, just to make sure that's smooth. Obviously, when we assemble it as a final assembly, I'll make sure it's all greased up properly. But before I do that, one thing I noticed while I was drilling tapping this, and when I was filing this, the metal seems quite soft, so I need to check this here as well. I'm going to see how soft that is later on. But any parts that do still look soft, I'm just going to temper them in, you know, with a blow lamp and engine oil method. It's not very sophisticated, but it will be more sophisticated than the current kind of non-existent temper that some of these parts seem to exhibit. So let's assemble the trigger, It's not too tricky. You will have to compress this, but initially we'll just lay it on the pin. Obviously it's fouled by that pin and the spring, so I'm just going to take a screwdriver, compress that out the way, and that can drop down. Oops, a bit more. There we go. And then that drops down past it, and that obviously then is free to move in there. Then we're going to install our modified trigger. I'm going to keep the set screw out for the moment because I don't want that to complicate matters. I purely want to see what the second stage adjustment's doing. So just put that in there. Whoops, there we go. I want you to move that the other side for the pin. Right. So let's just look at the geometry. And let me set the trigger first. Actually, beg your pardon. All right, there we go. So there's loads of engagement there. I haven't really affected engagement at all, which is good. Maybe fractionally actually, but loads of engagement. I'm just going to keep a little bit of tension on the trigger so we can see when it fires. So all of that is a very easy pull on the second stage on the screw. Yep, you can see that it's all second stage, second stage, second stage. First stage is not coming in, so I've screwed that screw in too far. It's fired just before it's got to the come off. Just before it's come off of that first stage. So let's back that out quite a bit, probably a turn. Let's cock it again. Right, trying again. Okay, there we go. That's all on. You can see the gap in there, so you know that's on that screw. Hopefully you can see that. It's pretty fine. Hopefully it shows up on the camera. So there we go. All second stage. Beg your pardon. All first stage still. You can see the second stage is getting close. There. It's just transition. You see, it's transitioned. So this part here is now touching rather than it relying on the screw, which means the trigger weight increases, so you can feel it. That's basically how all two-stage triggers work. You can now feel because the leverage is reduced. So now suddenly I'm on second stage. That's all second stage, and there's still quite a bit of travel. So that looks like a nice compromise on engagement and having a decent second stage feel. And the last thing I want to do now is how much can I reduce the overall engagement. So I've got all of this first stage way before second. I could start there and have that as first and then going on to second. I don't need really all of that. So I'm going to dial that out by reinserting my travel screw. Now I know I've got my second stage in roughly the right place. I've got a more appropriate screwdriver this time. So I'm just going to screw that in until that blade moves back to somewhere like the position. There we go. See the blade moving just slightly? Somewhere there. So, right, let's say that's what we want. So, shortish first stage, just to there. Well, not short, medium. I'd say that's a medium first stage with a good amount of sear engagement still. When there's the sear engagement, you've got at least 2.5mm of sear engagement there. So, loads of sear engagement. Second stage has come in. Still got 1.5 mm. And there, fire. I'm thinking that looks pretty good. I'm gonna build it and test it just with a minimum lube. There's a little bit of grease left on it from where I had some earlier. No Loctite, nothing. Just put it all together, test it, make sure I'm happy with that. When I am, I'm going to take it apart again, harden the sears. I may polish them up if I'm not happy with how they feel, which I wouldn't be surprised. And I'm going to Loctite those screws in place. They can be adjusted, but obviously they won't move around. So there you go. So let me build up the crossbow and we'll do some basic tests for the feel of the trigger and we'll see how it goes. Right folks, just going to do a final test on this. Now it's all assembled, just until I reserve the string. I've put a little bit of tape on it. I'm only going to fire 1 or 2 shots just to make sure everything's fine. the trigger's fine. I'll probably do a follow-up video when I've scoped it up, testing out the accuracy with a few different bolts. But this is really just to make sure it's working, make sure my trigger, my safety, everything's working properly. So let's see how it goes. I haven't got a foot claw for this at the moment. I'm going to have to just chest cock this. Will probably kind of be tough, so don't laugh when I struggle. It's either 120 or 150 pound prod. At some point I'll probably change it to something lighter, because obviously we don't hunt in the UK, so frankly I can't see much point in the high power ones. But this is going to be a bit tough to cock, so excuse me while I exert myself. Oof. Yeah, that's tough work. It's not actually the force of pulling it back, that's quite tough. It's the hole it wants to make in your chest that's the problem. Also, I haven't got any sights on it, so I'll be aiming at a target that is literally 4 feet away. So I'm keeping this safe. I'll go through everything. First of all, I'm going to double check the safety again. In position is locked, not able to pull, so that's good. Safety off. Yep, safety off. Nice first stage. Still first stage. Oh, that's on second stage now. Right there, that's second stage, sorry. Ooh, lovely, very predictable. I like that. What I wanted to check, I don't see any, you probably can't see that, I don't see any nasty marks or anything that looks like the beginning of a cut on that tape there. There's obviously the mark where the jaws rested on it, but nothing that looks like a cut. So I'm hopeful that the smoothing activity we did on the trigger that retains the string there, I'm hopeful that that has done its job and stopped it from cutting the string again, so it'll last when I reserve it. Let's cock this one more time. I'll pick a different spot on my body to destroy. Oh, that is hard work. Quick tip, guys, get the foot stirrup. I bought this second hand, didn't come with a foot stirrup. I'll make one. It's not a particularly complicated thing to make, so it's a real pain not having one. I guess if it was like a £90 prod it would be fine, but I need to measure what this is, but it's at least 120. My guess is it's probably, I think it's a £150 prod actually. So let's aim a bit lower, don't want to destroy my own arrow. Safety off. First stage, all the way, nice and light. Nice and light, still light. There's resistance, and there's the second stage. Lovely. So let's summarise really quickly. Very happy with the 2-stage trigger modifications. Very happy with the stabilisation for that. Happy that I've reduced the trigger reach to something more manageable. As I said, with this stock design, I think the modern ones are actually more like this anyway. And looking at that string, it's grabbed the string in the exact same place, not surprisingly. It's not trying to cut the string at all, so I think that's also good. So all I'm going to do now is de-string it, reserve the string, make myself a foot claw, and then I'll probably do a follow-up video to have a look at how the thing shoots. Thanks for watching.